much, and thank you also for the nice introduction. It's lovely to be here today with you. I will give you a very brief introduction to a research we conducted earlier this year about creating community impact through solidarity. As you've already heard, my colleague Adina will talk a little bit more about our research next week. So I will try to keep my presentation rather short and sweet so that we have more time for exchange. So what's the impact on individual level when we look at European Solidarity Corps projects? First of all, what really is a European Solidarity Corps project? As most of you know, it is an easy gateway for young people to achieve personal development as well as to get engaged in community service. So personal development competences plus a sense of service is basically what is at the core of European Solidarity Corps projects. And we do see communities as being one of the main beneficiaries with the European Solidarity Corps projects. However, of course, communities are not the only beneficiaries, but as we've already said, also individuals as well as organizations do greatly benefit from the impact these projects can create. So with our research, we wanted to investigate the question, what really is community impact in a sense, and are ESC projects really creating community impact? That was the core of our research. Before I tell you more about what we researched, I actually do have a question for you to reflect about in just maybe a few seconds. What is a community to you? And also, who are the communities who are targeted with the project work that you are doing in your organization? Just think about that for a second. So we say communities can be many things. It can be organizations. Communities can be defined by a physical location, like a municipality or a city, but also digital communities, of course, exist, or communities that share the same language, culture, or history. So really, even among researchers and also practitioners, of course, there are various definitions of what a community really is. For our research, we said that community means that there must be a shared identity as well as a sense of belonging. That was the basis we laid to investigate the impact. And this leads us to the second question. What is impact, especially in the context of ESC projects? Again, I want you to take a couple of seconds to just think about that. What is impact when you talk or think about your projects that you want to implement? I can tell you, and spoiler alert, impact is just as complex to define as communities, really. So again, the way we defined it or the way we talked about impact might not be the only way of talking or defining impact. But first of all, what's quite relevant, I think, to point out is impact is not equivalent to project outcomes or project results. When we talked about impact, we basically talked about change. And when we talk about change, there is one simple question that can help us to reflect on what changes. What was not there before, but is there now? So after your project, what changed compared to the beginning? What new projects, initiatives, what new people maybe were there? What new skills have you gained? Maybe even new processes. These are all changes that you can perceive in your community or in your organization or even on individual level. So also quite important for us is that we said impact is not a result of a single activity. Impact is rather something that occurs on a long-term perspective. And that means that it is the sum of components and circumstances coming together. So of course, you with your project maybe created a specific change, but when we talk about impact, it is more likely that your project contributed to a change that many other steps, projects, aspirations also contributed to. So most likely your ESC project in terms of impact is one puzzle piece of many aspects in your community. So again, this also emphasizes that impact is perceived in the long-term perspective. When we encourage you to think about community impact or project impact, we really want to encourage you to also think about who are the communities that you are including, and also who are other groups that are affected by your project that you didn't maybe even think about. So when you want to measure community impact, really start from the basics of clarifying who are your target audiences, what does your community look like? Because again, saying what a community is not as simple as it maybe seems. Coming to the next aspect, community impact, we said, is also, again, composed by different aspects. So on the one hand, we have direct impact, and on the other hand, we have indirect impact. Direct impact can mean that through the involvement of specific local communities, impact can be created. And that impact can most likely be quite obviously be observed in your communities. So for instance, in our research, we had projects that collaborated with elderly homes, for instance, that brought young people together with elderly people. To one group, for instance, created a beehive. And through that project, they wanted to, first of all, raise environmental awareness, but also create a public space for the rest of the community where, for instance, families could visit and investigate or get to know what beehives look like, how they work, where honey comes from, and so on. So this is a very direct way of showing that impact was achieved through that project. But when we talk about individual level impact, we rather focus on indirect impact. So it is quite connected to individual impact. And this means that through your project, you are creating impact with groups or even with people who you didn't even specifically targeted or wanted to reach. Because most likely, and I will talk about the snowball approach or the snowball effect later on, individual impact can create new community impacts in other places. So for instance, when your volunteers return back home, they might create community impact without you even knowing it. So this is a much more subtle way of creating impact. In our research, we differentiated 3 different levels. We talked about the individual level, we talked about the organizational level, as well as the community level. And of course, for this webinar, we are focusing on the individual level. So just again to emphasize, we believe that the effects of learning mobility that are created on a community, they are based on 2 simple steps. The first step is that individuals are learning something. They are learning about the community, they are acquiring new skills, and through that, they have an increased level of skills and competencies. And these level of skills and competencies, they benefit to the community, and through that, create impact on that community. So we can say that basically, if we empower participants and help them utilize the skills and competencies that they have, this automatically leads to community impact because they use these skills to support the project, to work with the community, and to create very tangible outcomes, really. So what we can say is what we want to say is we want to encourage you to rather focus on what participants can bring to your project, to your community, how they can contribute to your project, rather than just focusing to or just jumping to the community impact and to think about what change you want to achieve within a community. Rather have your participants at the focus of your project design, because again, through their skills, through their individual learning, this will automatically contribute to community change. I want to give you a brief insight into some identified indicators we talked about in our research for individual impact. And just to stress again, when we say individual level, or when we talk about the individual level, we're not talking about individuals in your community, but we are rather saying that the project has an impact on the participants in your ESC projects. So this is what we mean by individuals, the participants who contribute to your projects. And also, individual impact can include competencies, but it can also include experiences or the networks or the links that young people created or gained through your project. Still, a lot of the time we talk about skills and competencies, and just to maybe also define these terms a little bit, I want to share with you how we talk about skills and how we talk about competencies in our research. So skills is rather the ability and the capacities of young people to, for instance, carry out a process or to use existing knowledge that they already have to achieve a specific result. A competency is a bit wider. A competency is a combination of knowledge, of skills, and attitudes. So as you can see, skills are therefore one aspect of competencies. I want to share with you some examples of some indicators we identified in various projects, and they were really reoccurring. So it's not just one project that, for instance, showed problem-solving competencies, but it's really multiple projects that showed the same effects in our research. And I will not read out all of them, but just to talk about some of them. For instance, intercultural competence, of course, if you have a group of young people from several countries, for instance, if you have team volunteering projects, that will foster intercultural competence, that will also increase tolerance for young people, as well as problem-solving skills, because the more freedom and flexibility young people have in their projects, the more hurdles they will also discover, and then as a team, of course, overcome. Also in team, but as well as in individual or even solidarity projects, we saw a big change in self-confidence and self-efficacy. The more, again, freedom and flexibility you give to participants, the more trust you also give them, in a sense, which is an experience that for some people, specific groups, for instance, young people with few opportunities, is a quite special experience that really boosts their self-confidence and self-efficacy. And also young people with fewer opportunities, I will talk about that in the end a bit more. They also showed a great effect when it comes to their perceived independence. Of course, for young people, it's quite special to be abroad alone for the first time, to take an ownership of deciding what project they want to participate in, what they want to do, and finding their own ways in that new context. So yes, these are some meta-level skills or competencies that young people gained. But also to stress again, it's also the small things. For instance, digital competence. We had a course, we had a project where participants had to develop courses and videos for a museum. And they basically, their project was focused around video production. So of course, they gained a lot of video production skills in that project. And fun fact to that project, a different young person was actually the one that designed the project. And he was the first one who brought these video production competencies to the organization and said, hey, I can actually teach these skills to other people, and then we can create a project out of that. And this is one part of that snowball effect that I was already talking about. So sharing some more key insights on individual impact. I already briefly touched upon young people with fewer opportunities. We could see that especially disadvantaged groups, they benefit so greatly from ESC projects. For instance, we had projects where specifically needs, so young people who are not in education or employment right now, they got to explore practical skills in their project, which also led to an immersion into a new and foreign vocational context. So that was a possibility for them to actually figure out, what do I want to do in future when it comes to employment, for instance, or even education, but also what skills do I bring, because there was less pressure in that context to perform if we compare it to educational context. So this gave them the freedom to really reflect on their skills, on their confidence, and to then later on have a better integration into a working environment once they returned home. But of course, also for young people with fewer opportunities, participating in an ESC project abroad really broadens their horizon, because especially for these groups of young people, it is very challenging to go abroad and to get to know foreign contexts. So having that context, that low entry context of an ESC project, is a great opportunity for them to discover that and again to boost their self-confidence. What we could also see as a best practice is that we can boost the impact we have on individuals through offering targeted personal support and as well as tailored opportunities. So this is what I mean when I say don't try to only focus on what community change you want to achieve with your project, but think about who are the young people you want to include in your project and how can you utilize their skills. So if you take the time to really get to know your volunteers, to get to know what they are afraid of, what skills they lack, but also what capacities, what skills they bring to the organization, and you utilize that in a very smart way, then both your project as well as your organization can have a maximized impact as well as the young people themselves, because they can really have that feeling of being useful to the cause and to the project. So what we want to encourage is to really be flexible to meet the needs of your volunteers and to not just utilize them as a workforce, maybe in your project. And also, if you feel like, especially again in the field of working with young people with few opportunities, you lack the competencies within your organization, it can be a great way to establish cooperations with local authorities or NGOs. We had projects in our research that, for instance, worked with local employment offices or consultation. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but offices that consult young people who want to join the labor market. And they were used as experts in the project to have the best integration of needs young people who came from foreign countries to work in the organization. So basically these corporations, these local authorities, they brought in the expertise, and the organization gave the environment and the support of the volunteers. Just to mention one example, but there are many examples of great collaboration. Also, application of new competencies goes beyond learning. It is not just about young people learning new things or intensifying their learning, but it's also about really taking ownership of these skills and being able to use their skills to increase, for instance, their worth when it comes to employability. So in many research, we saw that ESC project participation really increases the employability of young people because they bring so many valuable skills to organizations, to the market, to wherever, even if they go back to education. Almost last but not least, of course, if young people go abroad and they get to know new communities and new countries, this leads to greater awareness. Also, if young people leave their usual social context and dive into a new societal context in a different country. And especially when it comes to societal challenges, this awareness can help them to contribute to solving societal challenges. So for instance, if young people worked with refugees in their project, we could really see that they got aware about situation and challenges refugees face, and they bring back that knowledge to their own communities, to their own context, where they, for instance, get engaged in refugee support and so on. So this awareness is also something that has a long-lasting impact on individuals. And this leads me to the next point, where, of course, we could see that young people who got engaged once, they are more likely to get engaged in a long-term perspective, and they are more likely to become active citizens, whether it's in their community, in their country, or in general, of course, also in the European context. And the final point I already told you is to utilize the snowball effect. With every individual who's participating in your country, you also gain access, at least partly, to a new community, which is their home community. So for instance, if you have diverse individuals, diverse participants joining your project, and they take back all these new perspectives, these new competencies and skills, you are most likely to also impact their home community and maybe even encourage new people to come. Because we saw if you had a participant from one specific community or one specific country, we had several projects where in the following generations, other people followed the path of that young person and also participated in the project. And the snowball effect can be seen in so many other things as well. But if you want to discover that, take a look at our research as well. And with this, I would like to conclude with a quote that's in the beginning of our research. Our publication or this publication also indicates that it is always important to look beyond what is written by others, especially by researchers. We have a very theoretical approach to things, which of course can be helpful, but especially for you practitioners, it's not the only thing you should rely on. We really want to encourage you to closely look at your specific community and your specific projects or initiatives and see what changes are happening there and what changes you could contribute to. Because in the end, you are the best expert for your specific community and for your specific context. So our research is just there to support you, but it's not the only thing you should focus or rely on. And that's also why I'm very much happy to hear about one of our best practices from our research, Peter from Landlabor, who really was a great best practice example of showing individual impact. So I'm sure he can tell you much more about how they did that, and maybe that's a good way to get inspired on how you can do that as well.